In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King says the January parliamentary elections have won international acclaim and hails the Independent Elections Commission. The King tells U.S. senators settlements and other Israeli unilateral actions are a key hurdle to peace efforts. And clashes continue in the occupied West Bank for a second day, and Israel presses Hamas to rein in rocket firing from the Gaza Strip. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King received a report by the Independent Elections Commission on last January's parliamentary polls. The report details real practices during the polling process in line with the Commission's law and included recommendations for decision makers to upgrade the polling process and apply world-class criteria. Commission President Abdel-Ilah Al-Khatib briefed the King on the way voting progressed and measures taken by the Commission for the success of the voting, in addition to observations recorded by international election monitors. The King told the Commission President and members that he was proud of their efforts to hold the legislative elections according to the highest standards of fairness and transparency. He noted the elections had won acclaim at the local and international levels. King Abdullah said the executive and legislative authorities should benefit from the Commission's report to upgrade performance. He called on the Commission to keep all social forces posted on its experience and take their notes into consideration. His Majesty the King cautioned that continuing unilateral steps by Israel constitute a key hurdle to peace efforts in the Middle East. He cited such actions as the ongoing settlement building, attacks against Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, and attempts to Judaize the holy city. During a meeting with a delegation of U.S. senators, King Abdullah pointed out that the two-state solution is the only way to achieve security and stability in the region. The U.S. delegation included Kristen Gillibrand, Lindsey Graham, John Hoeven, and William Cohen. The meeting touched upon a number of issues, including the situation in Syria, efforts to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the two-state solution, and means to boost Jordanian-U.S. ties. His Majesty reiterated the need to find a solution to the Syrian conflict to end the bloodshed, preserve the country's unity, and ensure the safety of the Syrian people. He also spoke of Jordan's efforts to host Syrian refugees. The U.S. delegation lauded His Majesty's stand on establishing peace in the region. They praised the King's wisdom and leadership in dealing with consequences of the Arab Spring and Jordan's unique model for democratic transformation. The U.S. senators said they recognize the King's role to cement security and stability in the Middle East. A royal decree appointed Lieutenant General Tawfiq Tawalbe as Director General of the Public Security Department. The cabinet nominated Tawalbe to head the Public Security Department, replacing General Hussein Majali, who was appointed Interior Ministry in the government of Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour. Tawalbe was Director General of the Gendarmerie Forces. Meanwhile, the cabinet named State Minister for Media Affairs and Minister of Political and Parliamentary Affairs Mohammed Momani as official government spokesperson. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour made a telephone call to his Palestinian counterpart Salam Fayyad to inquire about his health. The Palestinian Prime Minister was earlier admitted to a hospital in the West Bank city of Ramallah. Mansour wished Fayyad a speedy recovery to continue serving the Palestinian people and their just cause. Jordan, he said, is ready to host the Palestinian Prime Minister for additional medical treatment at the kingdom's hospitals. 11 policemen were injured when a driver deliberately tried to run them over and fled. The Public Security Department said the driver was one of dozens of public vehicle drivers who have staged a 3-day sit-in in front of Parliament demanding abolishing regulations restricting their entry to Saudi Arabia. It said the striking drivers, including the attacker, had blocked the main street of their vehicle by their vehicles, causing disruption in a key route of the capital. It said drivers also verbally and physically abused police and gendarmerie personnel at the site, adding that police restraint had prevented clashes as the protesters had vacated the scene. The statement said 9 of the injured policemen were admitted to hospital and the driver will be referred to justice. Israel pressed Hamas to rein in militants firing rockets from the Gaza Strip. 2 rockets have struck an Israeli town on the border with Gaza, drawing airstrikes by Israel. The flare-up was sparked by anger in Gaza over the death of a Palestinian prisoner held by Israel. By afternoon, the frontier had fallen quiet, but demonstrations continued across the occupied West Bank. Luay Balqar has an update.
The death in custody of terminally ill Palestinian prisoner has sparked violent protests across the occupied West Bank. In the town of Hebron, Palestinian youths pelted Israeli soldiers with stones and rocks, and troops responded with volleys of tear gas, stun grenades and rubber bullets. In Beit Omar village and Ofa military prison, Palestinian youths confronted Israeli soldiers, but there were no serious injuries. At Ramoun jail in southern Israel and in several Israeli prisons, Palestinian detainees who were touched off by the death of Maysara Hamdiya threw objects at guards who responded with tear gas. The 46-year-old Abu Hamdiya was serving a life sentence over an attempt to bomb an Israeli cafe. He died of cancer, but the Palestinians blamed Israel, saying negligence was to blame as his condition deteriorated in the days before his death. The president's death also sent tension running high in the Gaza Strip, where Israel launched airstrikes and threatened more attacks against Hamas, which governs the blockaded coastal territory. Rocket attacks were fired from the Gaza Strip and struck southern Israel, but caused no injuries. Israeli jets struck an open area in northern Gaza, but no one was injured. A group called Majlis Shura al-Mujahideen claimed responsibility for the 2 rockets at Israel as a response to the death of the prisoner. Hamas accused Israel of failing to provide timely medical treatment for him in the Israeli hospital. The strikes threatened to end an Egyptian-mediated ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, a truce that has kept the frontier relatively quiet since last November, when some 170 Palestinians and 6 Israelis were killed in a brief cross-border war. Abu Hamdiya's death in prison threatened to raise tensions in the occupied West Bank, where Palestinians have held several protests in recent weeks in support of prisoners. Luay Balqar for the news at 10.
About 2,000 Syrian refugees have crossed into Jordan in the past 24 hours. The Jordanian armed forces said border guards escorted the refugees, many of them children, women, and elderly. They said 10 wounded men were among the new arrivals, who were treated by medics stationed on the border points designated for the crossing of the refugees. Other sick and wounded refugees were transferred to civil and military hospitals, while the rest were based to the Zaatri refugee camp. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will visit Turkey on Sunday to consult allies on issues including Syria's civil war. Washington regards Turkey as a pivotal player in backing the Syrian opposition and planning for an era after Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In the meantime, a new exodus is flowing from Syria as fighting edges closer to the heart of Damascus. Farah Ajlouni has an update.
Fighting moves closer to the heart of the Syrian capital. The latest video shows part of Damascus under intense attacks with huge plumes of smoke rising above several areas of the city as rebels and troops loyal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad battled it on. The latest fighting triggered a new exodus of refugees. Those who swore they would never flee are selling belongings to escape a battle now raging on their doorsteps. March was the bloodiest month to date in Syria's more than 2-year-old civil war, with an estimated 6,000 people killed. Footage from Aleppo shows residents climbing through rubble in search of signs of life. More than 1 million Syrian refugees have already left, with thousands more fleeing daily in a war that has already claimed more than 70,000 lives. And as Syrians seek safety in neighboring countries, the cost of hosting the refugees is also increasing. A Russian plane carrying about 26 tons of humanitarian aid for Syrian refugees arrived in Beirut today, the first of several shipments scheduled to arrive this month.
I would like to mention that among the aid there's food aid and household items and electric items and generators and necessary items. Also on this occasion I would like to say again to confirm the position of Russia, which is in favor of a political settlement for the Syrian conflict by ending the violence and holding dialogue between the authorities and the opposition.
Hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees have fled to Lebanon since the uprising against the Syrian regime began in March 2011. Lebanon says it is struggling to provide shelter and basic needs for them and has asked the international community for help. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
Back here at home, a flight from Istanbul landed in the city of Aqaba, inaugurating a regular route between Jordan and Turkey. The new route will give millions of travelers direct access to the port city, just a stone's throw from some of the kingdom's most famous tourist sites. It will increase the number of Turkish visitors to the kingdom, which witnessed a 70% decline last year. Hala Dababne has more.
Thanks to the efforts of the Aqaba Special Economic Zone Authority, Jordan Tourism Board and USA Jordan Tourism Development Project, tourism has gained a significant boost from increased direct flights between Aqaba and Istanbul. The new route gives millions of Turkish travelers direct access to Jordan, along with a superb location to three of the country's key tourist destinations, namely Petra and Wadi Rum.
أعتقد هذا الإنجاز بفتح الخطوط التركية.
I think the Aqaba-Istanbul new route is part of the tourism and economic cooperation. The Turkish airlines to Aqaba are fully reserved until July. This makes Aqaba a tourist and economic attraction among 95 countries. Ticket prices till the end of May are sold at 93 dinars and will be up at 200 dinars for the next 5 years. This is a special encouraging price.
The opening of the route is a shot in the arm for tourism, as it will expand existing markets and open new ones in ways that were not possible before, especially at these challenging times of a decline in the number of tourists arriving in the country and low hotel occupancy rates in Aqaba and Petra. Planned projects to develop hotels in Aqaba are expected to create more than 7,000 jobs over the next 5 years. Increasing the number of visitors can further boost the tourism input in the national economy. Today's event was organized and implemented by the USA Tourism Project as part of their continued efforts to help increase the number of visitors to Jordan in order to revive a sector which employs more than 35,000 Jordanians.
العلاقات الثنائية بين الأردن والتركية على الدوام.
Ties between Jordan and Turkey are strong and special and are based on a brotherly and cooperative relations in various political, economic and other fields. During His Majesty's visit to Turkey last month, he discussed issues of common interest, Aqaba in particular. His Majesty spoke about the possibility of making the city of Aqaba an economic and investment hub in addition to being a tourist attraction.
The launch of the Turkish Airlines flights to Aqaba marks the first foreign international network carrier to make scheduled flights to Aqaba Airport. The city, with a liberalized, low-tax, duty-free area, aspires to become a world-class hub for business and leisure, easily accessible to the Middle East, Asia and Europe. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
A Chinese diplomat met ambassadors from the United States and the two Koreas to express serious concern over the situation on the Korean peninsula. North Korea closed access to a joint factory zone with South Korea, putting at risk $2 billion a year in trade that is vital for the North. Pyongyang had earlier announced the North will restart all facilities at its main nuclear complex hours after the U.S. stepped up the military standoff by sending a destroyer capable of shooting down ballistic missiles to the northern peninsula. This report has more.
Two U.S. F-22 stealth fighters prepare to take off at this South Korean base and return to Japan in the latest show of force against North Korea as tensions with its south neighbor rise ever higher. Earlier this week, the North announced it had plans to reopen all of its nuclear facilities after it was targeted by further sanctions. It also blocks South Korean workers from entering a joint industrial zone along the shared border, a project inaugurated in 2000 as part of efforts to improve ties between the two Koreas. Some 800 South Korean factory managers and workers still remain in the zone.
This morning, North Korea has informed us that it will suspend entry of South Korean workers but allow them to depart.
Meanwhile, the North's ally China weighed in on the situation, expressing serious concern for the deteriorating ties and calling for the reconciliation between the two sides. Tensions first started to rise in February following a North Korean nuclear rocket test denounced by Western powers. Recent threats against American bases froze relations further and prompted the U.S. to beef up its presence regionally.
9 Taliban suicide bombers killed themselves and 44 others in an attack on a courtroom in western Afghanistan where tens of their comrades were on trial. Causing the biggest death toll in a single attack in 2 years, the militants, strapped with explosives, stormed the governor's compound in the capital of Farah province, bordering Iran, where the trial was taking place. 34 of the dead were civilians and the rest were Afghan security forces. The Taliban said all 10 of its fighters who were on trial were freed. The attack will add to the concerns about how Afghan security forces will manage once NATO-led combat troops withdraw by the end of next year. China has found 2 more cases of a new strain of bird flu, and one of the victims has died, bringing the total number of those infected to 9. The World Health Organization said it was following the situation closely and was in contact with Chinese authorities, which it said were actively investigating the cases amid heightened disease surveillance. Flu experts across the world are studying samples isolated from the patients to assess the potential of an H7N7 human pandemic. Other strains of bird flu, such as H5N1, have been circulating for many years and can be transmitted from bird to bird and bird to human, but not generally from human to human. The Los Angeles Lakers beat the Dallas Mavericks 101-81 as both teams fight for the final playoff spot in the Western Conference. Kobe Bryant led the way for the Lakers with a triple-double, scoring 23 points with 11 rebounds and 11 assists. Dirk Nowitzki struggled for the Mavericks, finishing with 11 points and missing 2 free throws late in the fourth quarter. The Lakers quickly grabbed a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter and controlled the rest of the game to cruise to a 20-point victory. Los Angeles is now tied with the Utah Jazz for the final playoff spot in the Western Conference.
When balls come off long, you've got to secure the defensive rebound if you're Dallas. Gasol into right. He had a strong move that time.
FIFA has approved the appointment of Goal Control GmbH as the official provider of goal line technology for the Confederation Cup in Brazil this year. Goal Control will also be used for the World Cup in 2014 in Brazil. FIFA approved the use of technology to see if a ball has crossed the goal line last year following a number of controversial incidents. FIFA said the use of Goal Control 4D in Brazil was subject to a final installation test at each stadium. Finally, a quick look at the weather. Dusty tonight with a chance for scattered thundery showers and moderate winds picking up at times. Tomorrow, a significant drop in temperature is expected with partly cloudy skies and rainfall in northern and central parts of the kingdom. Winds will be gusty, blowing dust in the south and east of the kingdom. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a pleasant night and partly cloudy day tomorrow with moderate winds and choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King says the January parliamentary elections have won international acclaim and hails the Independent Elections Commission. The King tells U.S. senators settlements and other Israeli unilateral actions are a key hurdle to peace efforts. And clashes continue in the occupied West Bank for a second day, and Israel presses Hamas to rein in rocket firing from the Gaza Strip. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.